Hi, welcome back to British Literature, Session 2. I am Thelma English. You're welcome to call me Mrs. English, Mrs. E, Miss Thelma, whatever is easier for you. Welcome back to Brit Lit Session 2. Let's open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we are so grateful that we are able to educate at home, to study at home. We thank you for the parents. We thank you for the students and the families represented here by these students. And we pray that you would bless them this school year, that they could learn things that are worthy, that are worthwhile, that will help them in life, and that will glorify you. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, you made it through your first week. I hope you loved the reading. How many of you listened to the Thelma audio? All the audio for syllabus pages 1 through 67. The audio is quite popular now. This is our introduction, talking a little bit about the Battle of Malden, AD 991. The imitation of Christ. Last week, you had a volunteer offer to read this week, and this is time to pause the recording and do your own devotion. Okay, we're back. Make sure you get a volunteer for next week. Have the teacher or parent write their name down and choose anything that you like from the Imitation of Christ. Every single page is worthy. Now, hopefully you are all familiar with the Thelma's Library website by this point. Your username is student, capital S. Your password is William 1066. And I forgot to write the time down. 1066 William. And that is abbreviated for William the Conqueror, who came into Britain from France and conquered Britain. And that's how he becomes the first English king of Britain and creates England. And the abbreviation for William is capital W, lowercase m, 1066, William 1066. All right, let's review our schedule. We're going to be looking at the Old English period today, trying to kind of put ourselves back there in history and understand what those Saxons were all about. We'll have our introduction to Beowulf, and we'll talk about that Christian and heroic synchronism. The Christian worldview we're very familiar with. We know that it's all about humility and loving others as Christ loved us, and doing unto others as we would have them do unto us. It is kindness and humility and taking care of those less fortunate, widows and orphans. That's what the Christian worldview is all about, and making covenants in society with one another and not breaking those covenants. We have remnants of that, like the covenant of marriage is a remnant of making covenants. And what is the heroic worldview? You kind of know what that is now. After your syllabus reading, if you read well, that heroic age is it's a worldview that is based very much on honor, isn't it? Based on honor. So things like humility, grace, mercy are looked on as weaknesses. And so how do you tell that kind of a culture about Jesus? How do you tell them about Christianity and about Jesus? And in the beginning, we believe, we don't know for sure, but this is what it looks like historically and archaeologically, that there is a syncretism between this Christian and heroic worldview. It is a blending of those, believe it or not. And that's why Beowulf seems so odd to us. And that's why we have a hard time even understanding the Battle of Malden. Why wouldn't they go get their women and their goodies, their important, valuable items, and run away? Why stay and risk all getting slaughtered and having your women and children hauled off? Why? And that's that heroic worldview. Okay, if you haven't done so already, you're going to be turning in your bead vocabulary. That's worth 10% of this quarter's grade. We'll take a quiz then in a couple of slides on last week's reading, all 67 pages. So hopefully you know who wrote what and the names and things like that. It's only a 10-question quiz. And let's see, Caedmon's hymn, Christ is Risen. I meant to remove that from the slide. That's for next week. Do I really have that? I just didn't remove it from the slide. And we'll have a fascinating lecture on the historian Tacitus. I'll be reading right from Tacitus, this historian from the time right after Jesus Christ. He even mentions Jesus. He had heard about Jesus. If you take classical lit, I'll read that part of Tacitus. But for British lit, we're reading the part of Tacitus where he talks about these Saxon people. And it's quite fascinating. And it really gives us insight into the first century, anyway, of the Saxon people, what they were like. And of course, Beowulf is several hundred years, 500-600 years later, but we have quite an insight into how they lived and what they were like. Our reading this week, we are beginning your Beowulf book, and we are all reading the Frederick Redsimum translation. We're all reading the Redsimum translation. You have to have that one or we won't be on the same page, and you might misunderstand the vocabulary and you'll misunderstand line numbers. It is a translation, so it's really important that we all have the same translation. You have a sample of Old English as it exists in your syllabus, and of course we cannot read that. It takes an expert like someone like J.R. Tolkien to read Old English. So we're going to begin Beowulf, reading Beowulf, and we'll begin the Beowulf study guide. You may have a paper copy that you got today, or maybe your teacher parent is having you download it from session 2 on your own. But you need to download the Beowulf study guide. If you get a paper copy today, you can use that to take notes on, but you still need to download the Beowulf study guide because you'll be putting your answers onto that study guide. There will be no handwritten answers on study guides unless you are in a very particular situation and made that agreement with your parent or teacher. Otherwise, we all use our computers. You download the study guide, you save it somewhere on your computer, don't work on it in cyberspace, and then close it up and realize you were just typing in cyberspace and all of your answers are gone. That happens all the time. So download the Beowulf study guide, make a place for it in your computer, make yourself a folder for British Lit homework assignments, and you can type your answers in. You can write them out by hand as you read if you want, but then once a week or once a day, once per day, type in your answers into your study guide so that you'll be up to par. If you're listening to the 206 minutes, that means 3 hours, 45 minutes, but that's a 2-week project, half this week, half next week, 5 sound files, and you can have me read it to you, explain it to you as I go, and I suppose give you all the answers as we go. But I would suggest either writing them by hand on your paper copy, or if you prefer to just work from your computer, then you can read right in front of your computer and work from your computer. So you've got your study guide, electronically or paper or both. Utilize the glossary for Beowulf vocabulary. You have a Beowulf vocabulary assignment that's also due, and you can look in your glossary for all of those words. Words like litotes and alliteration, they are all in the newest copy of the glossary. That is from 2022, the newest copy of the glossary. This assignment will need a cover sheet when you turn it in 2 weeks. It is a 2-week project. And if you wonder how to make a cover sheet, there's a sample on page 421 in the syllabus. And you'll be looking at shifting worldviews in the syllabus this week because it's important. You might put a sticker there, mark it, highlight it up so that you can keep track of where we're going with worldview as it shifts. So you're writing, you need to complete half of your Beowulf study guide, and you need to work on your vocabulary words for Beowulf. Optional online, there is an Old English OE, a read aloud of Beowulf fighting Grendel. If you want to see what the Old English sounds like, it sounds like German or Hebrew. If you've heard either of those languages, there's a lot of sounds. There is an interesting piece of a history book. There's a cool history book out there by Bill Cooper called After the Flood. And chapter 10, he provides at his webpage. And so I've posted it here, the 10 pages that you can print and read or just read online, or you don't have to, it's optional. But it is fascinating. What happened after the flood? Why do we think were there still giants? That type of thing, interesting information, which would apply very much to Beowulf and his age. And then online is me reading Beowulf, your 2-week project. There are 5 sound files total that total 206 minutes. That's about 3 3/4 hours. And remember, next week, bring your Beowulf book next week. Next week, it is presumed that you've looked over everything, looked over the study guide, that you've read at least halfway through, that you've done at least half of your study guide. And next week will be your opportunity to ask your teacher. I'll go through that with you here in class, but to ask a teacher or parent questions. What does this mean? I didn't understand this, etc. Whatever your questions are, next week is your chance to get them answered in class. If you are the type who likes to stall and put things off, then next week comes and you think, oh, I'll just have a week off and start next week, and then you will have no idea what kinds of questions to ask. So I suggest that you keep up with this project and do half of it this week. All right, turn in your bead vocabulary if you have not already. And it is time for our quiz. The quiz is only 10 minutes long. I'm looking at it here. You know who Caedmon is. You read about the Ruthwell Cross, the Dream of the Rood. Beatty, you read about Beatty. Cuthbert, all the miracles. You read about the Battle of Malden. And let's see, a little bit about the heroic code. 10 questions. So go ahead and pause your audio and take your quiz. Okay, we're back. The quiz wasn't that bad, was it? Oh, this helmet. This helmet is from the British Museum, and it is a helmet. It's a Saxon helmet from about the time period of Beowulf, and so it ends up on the cover of lots of books. It is the helmet that is on the cover of my Rebsamen translation. That is this same, there we go. That's this same copy. It's the same helmet. And there's a boar's head in the front. Everything that looks really smooth in this picture has actually been recreated by a museum. All the little bits and pieces that look like they're glued on, that's what they actually retrieved out of the grave. But they have enough, and there have been enough other helmets found that they know what this looked like. It has these cheek pieces so that somebody can't slash you across the cheek with a sword. Protective nose piece. The guy even has a little mustache and quite the eyebrows. But this boar's head decoration that is laid across the middle, across the top, is quite fascinating. And there have been lots of things dug up in the last 100 years to tell us how they decorated things, what their military pieces looked like. And at the British Museum, of course, is this helmet, and there's an awesome shield and all types of jewelry and brooches and earrings. These are my Saxon replica earrings and things of that. Let's see, purses, all types of things. All right, when you're writing papers for me, look at syllabus page 499, that 429, that's where this list comes from, page 429 in the syllabus. When you are writing your study guide, if you quote from the book, then quote the book, Beowulf, and the line numbers. Or if it's from the syllabus, if you're writing about Malden and you're quoting from the syllabus, then give the syllabus page and column number. And I mentioned this last week, but you have to learn this at high school. E.g. example gratis means for example, and a sample sentence would be, our children all have M names. And then as a parenthetical comment, for example, Michael Mitchell. And IE means in other words. An example sentence would be, my children have excellent behavior. In other words, they obey their parents. So you say it again in a different way, in other words. Whereas for an example is you are giving an example. So an example and saying it again in other words are two different things. And high school is the time to learn those. No contractions unless you are writing dialogue. And if you are writing dialogue, then you're welcome to say, Anna and Charity said, don't tell us what to do. So when you're writing dialogue, use all the contractions. You can even make up words if you want when you're writing dialogue and add slang and all of that. But no slang in a study guide, no slang in a vocabulary of words or something like that. Gonna, kids, all that type thing, no slang. Writing numbers, we talked about this last week. Writing numbers, when you write a number from 1 through 10, you use words to write those numbers. And then for 11 and forward, you can use numerals. And these are the good, perfect examples. There were 3 brave thanes on the shore. There were 10 brave thanes on the shore. There were 11 brave thanes on the shore. But if we use the word 11 brave thanes were on the shore, if 11 begins the sentence, you must use the word. The use of stick. If you have never seen SIC in brackets, that's what we use for misspellings or odd language. For example, in my paper, I might write, the weird women in Macbeth are witches, which is true. There are women in Macbeth that are called the weird women. And you're going to have a red squiggle line under it because Word doesn't like it. They think it's that you've misspelled W-Y-R-D, when in reality you're using some Old English, Middle English. And so I've added, as the writer, I've added SIC in brackets. And that means that the word previous, the sick, tells me you quoted your material correctly. The error is simply the original spelling. Use brackets when you insert your own words into a quoted text. I do this all the time on my PowerPoints. If I am quoting an expert to you and they use big words, or if I'm quoting a section of a book and they use unusual or big words, people used to have much larger vocabulary than we have now. I will often add sick, and I add something. I'll say, for example, in brackets, I'll say that means trees, or weird, I might say that means weird, W-E-I-R-D in English, something like that. So if you insert something into a quote, or you have to kind of fix something because you think I'll mark it wrong, that's where sick belongs, and it belongs in brackets, not parentheses. It belongs in brackets. All right, you check your instructions. Did you write a paper that will make me happy? Did you write the complete word count for your age group? You've got to at least write the word count just to get a C. You have to write the whole word count. If you're hoping for a higher grade, I'm going to expect something more than minimum. Are you on topic? Every now and then someone gets off topic and writes a different paper. Does your writing shift tenses from past to present or in future? Did you check for contractions? And very often we'll choose to write in the historical present. I did not put that on the PowerPoint, but the historical present is when we write about the past as though it's present. Britnut marches out into the sea to battle with the other, with his enemies. Instead of saying Britnut marched out to sea, I might say Britnut marches out to sea and tell it as though it's happening right now. And we call that the historical present. And some people prefer to write in that, but choose all past, all present, or historical present. Choose one tense and try and stick with it. That is even the case for me. I still have difficulties not switching tenses. Have you given it to somebody to be proofed, inserted quotes in a title? If I say your age group needs 3 quotes, you better make sure you have 3 quotes in there and that they are cited correctly and that I can find them again if I'm worried that you misquoted something or misquoted it partly or misunderstood or something. I have to have enough material in your citation to be able to find it again. And it is not cheating to give it to somebody to be proofed. Give it to someone to tell them what you have to have, because maybe your mom will say, aren't you supposed to have 3 quotes in this paper? And I don't see any. Check your paper for contractions. Don't have your teacher or parent check it where you might miss 1% for every contraction. Often that's what I do. I'll take off 1% for every single contraction. And that might, if you have 5 of those, that costs you half a letter grade. All right, have you prepared a cover sheet with your name, grade, the title, the paper title, Beowulf Study Guide, Beowulf vocabulary words. Did you give the course title? This is British Lit, and the year, all of that. Your name and your grade. You need to give your grade on the cover sheet so that your teacher, parent, facilitator, whoever is looking over your papers knows what grade you're in to know, did you satisfy the word count and the quote count for your age group? Did you double space your lines? That's the quickest thing to forget. Do it correctly and count your words, subtracting the quoted material. You can have all the quotes that you want, but they don't count as the word count. And did you cite your sources? Always cite your sources. If you don't cite a source, you may as well just take a black highlighter out, a black Sharpie out yourself and just cross out all of those words. If it's not cited, it's not a real quote. All right, this is just a little bit of fun. An Old English poem, and this is right out of your syllabus if you want to look it up too. Syllabus page 61. I just get a kick out of this. This is some college kid somewhere who wrote this. Hroldoth, the red-nosed reindeer. Here begins the deeds of Rudolph, tundra wanderer. Lo, Hroldoth, the red-nosed reindeer. That beast didn't have unshiny nostrils. The goodly nose cartilage glittered and glowed. The hoof-bearers taunted him with proud words. The comrades wouldn't allow wretched Hroldoth to join the reindeer games. Then, on Christmas Eve, bound in storms, Santa Claus remembered that, spoke formally to him, "Dear night-sighted friend, nose bright one, you, Hroldoth, shall lead my adorned rapid wagon." Then the sky flyers praised their lead dear. There was gladness and music. One of the horned ones sang, "Lo, Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer, your fame spreads broadly. You are renowned." So there we have Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer in Middle English, where we have all types of litotes. Those are those understatements. That's in your glossary. Those negative understatements. He didn't have unshiny nostrils, or something like a kenning. He's a tundra wanderer. He is a, let's see, they're driving in a rapid wagon. He's the lead deer. They are sky flyers. They're flying reindeer. Night-sighted friend. All of these things. We have these conjunctions of two words with a hyphen, and they are fun kennings. For example, a Saxon might call the sea the whale road. And what else do they use? The bone word hoard. If he gives a speech, it's a word. He unleashes his word hoard. I think you'll get a kick out of some of these. Okay, you read Caedmon, you read The Dream of the Rood, the story written in runes on the edge of the Ruthwell Cross in Dumfriesshire, Scotland. You read part of the historian Beattie's account of the life of St. Cuthbert. You also read the Battle of Malden, which took place in AD 991. You do need to remember that, and you need to remember that, as you now know. Let's see, our quiz was number 9. The Battle of Malden took place in the year, and you had to know that it was AD 991. And the options that I gave you were way off, 200 and 400 years off. So you need to realize that this is just before AD 1000, that it is AD 991. And this means it's before the Battle of Hastings, when William the Conqueror conquers England. This Norman, this French guy, comes over and conquers at the Battle of Hastings the last Saxon king, and takes over all of what becomes England, Britain. And this is a big, big deal in AD 1066. That's our password, isn't it, to our website. And so AD 991 is just before that. What is that, 50, 60 years? So the Saxon way is going to give way unto these Normans. And that's why Middle English, the next language that will come along when we get out of Beowulf and away from the Saxons and the Battle of Malden, Middle English will be a blend of Saxon and French, because William is coming in. And that's why even Chaucer, about AD 1385 to AD 1400, even Chaucer we have to read in translation, because even Middle English is too difficult for us. But Middle English we could figure out. Old English probably not. But the Battle of Malden taking place about AD 991, the end of the 10th century. The 10th century are the 900s. The 11th century are the 1000s. That's the way we count. This poem exhibits a remarkable syncretism of Christianity and the old Germanic heroic code. And what's that heroic code? Excessive pride, feudal allegiance, daring warriors, referring to Christian concepts of grace, providence, and afterlife in God's presence. Really odd when we see them blend, because it just seems odd to us. Excuse me. This is the plaque at the spot where the Battle of Malden was fought from the National Trust. This marks the site of the Battle of Malden. On and around this spot, an army of Danish raiders and the Essex Army commanded by Earl Byrhtnoth fought on 10th of August 991 AD. Byrhtnoth's heroic defeat and death became the subject of a great Anglo-Saxon poem. It is interesting that we have this poem. The poem survives, and unfortunately, and we have the poem survives, but unfortunately, our hero, they lost and they all died. But because we have the poem, here's the plaque. It would be nice if they could say, defeated their enemies here in the Battle of Malden, and that's not true. This is where they all died. And here's where Malden is. We'll be reading about the kingdom of Mercia. It's very near, it's in the area called Essex, and it's not really very far from London. So Malden is a very, very important part. There's a causeway that when the tide is out, you can walk across it. We kind of believe they may have had rocks, and maybe that's what they called a bridge. If you listened to me reading the Battle of Malden to you, it's very possible that they had rocks placed to serve as a bridge. When the tide went out, they could walk on it then. And when the tide was in, it would cover up that, what they are calling a bridge in AD 991. But they heroically wait so that their enemies have the advantage of the tide before they don't run away and get away while they could. They wait because they're heroic. Who were these proud Saxon people that the missionaries had to deal with? How do you share the gospel with a people who value revenge, war for the sake of proving yourself brave, and stealing other people's things? Why should you plant crops if you can go steal it? Why should you worry about finding women if you can just go steal one? All of that, all for the sake of proving yourself brave and demand allegiance to a heroic code, which does not mesh with biblical principles. How do you share the gospel with these people? We're going to use for our expert today the historian Tacitus. He's a first century historian. I mentioned to you that he actually mentions Jesus. He says that Jesus was the leader of an ugly crowd, a band led by somebody named Jesus, and that they were tortured and sent to the lions because they were so horrific. That's his view of the early Christians. But he also talks about the Saxons, and they pretty much haven't changed from this time of Tacitus to the time of Beowulf. There wouldn't be that many changes. And so he gives us this eyewitness view. And I go into quite a few of the chapters, and I've picked some perfect quotes, and then I'm using Tacitus. So he describes these people for us. And these are the people of Malden. These are the people of Beowulf. And this is from Tacitus's book, Germany. The Germans themselves, I should regard as Aboriginal. So he thinks they're like Aborigines from Australia 100 years ago or something. He thinks that they're a completely different kind of person. And they probably have been inbreeding. They all have blue eyes, they all have blonde hair. And so they look very, very different from any other culture of people. I should regard as Aboriginal and not mixed at all with other races through immigration or intercourse. And intercourse here means talking. They don't get together and talk things out. It does have two meanings. Through immigration or intercourse. For in former times, it was not by land, but on shipboard that those who sought to emigrate would arrive. And the boundless and, so to speak, hostile ocean beyond us is seldom entered by a sail from our world. So they don't really have people traveling over the sea from completely foreign places in the first century. In their ancient songs, which in Beowulf they're going to call lays, in their ancient songs, their only way of remembering and recording the past, their only way of remembering or recording the past, because they don't write down. They're not literate. They're illiterate, or sometimes people that are politically correct will say they are pre-literate. This is before they learned how to write. And so this is their only way of remembering the past, is to memorize it, right? They celebrate an earthborn god, Telsko, and his son Manus as the origin of their race, as their founders. They say that Heracles, too, English has anglicized this to Hercules. If you take classical lit, you'll realize that in Greek, and he's a Greek god, that it's Heracles. They say that Heracles, too, once visited them, and when going into battle, they sing of him first of all heroes. They have also those songs of theirs, by the recital of which Berytus, they call it. They rouse their courage. So they sing a song. It's kind of like going to a football game and you sing this rousing song about your team to get them all riled up before they go out and play football against each other and knock each other over. Well, they sing this big song before they go into battle. While from the note, they augur the result of the approaching conflict. What did I say? Heracles too. They also have, I missed a part, excuse me for going back. They say Heracles too once visited them, and when going into battle, they sing of him first of all the heroes. They have also those songs of theirs, by the recital of which, a Berytus they call it, they rouse their courage, while from the note they augur the result of the approaching conflict. For as their line shouts, they inspire or feel alarm. It is not so much an articulate sound as a general cry of valor. They aim chiefly at a harsh note and a confused roar, putting their shields to their mouth, but so that by reverberation, it may swell into a fuller and deeper sound. So they're scaring their enemies by shouting into their shield, which would work on making the sound appear to be bigger. For my own part, I agree with those who think that the tribes of Germany are free from all taint of intermarriages with foreign nations, and that they appear as a distinct, unmixed race, like none but themselves. Hence, too, the same physical peculiarities throughout so vast a population. All have fierce blue eyes, red hair, huge frames, fit only for a sudden exertion. They are less able to bear laborious work. Heat and thirst they cannot in the least endure, because they're used to the cold. To cold and hunger their climate and their soil inure them. So they are not afraid of the soil. They carry a spear with a narrow and short head, but so sharp and easy to wield that the same weapon serves, according to circumstances, for close or distant conflict. As for the horse soldier, he is satisfied with a shield and spear. The foot soldiers also scatter showers of missiles, each man having several, and hurling them to an immense distance, and being naked or lightly clad with a little cloak. On the whole, one would say that their chief strength is in their infantry, which fights along with the cavalry. Admirably adapted to the action of the latter is the swiftness of certain foot soldiers, who are picked from the entire youth of their country and stationed in front of their line. So they have their fastest runners in the front. Their number is fixed, 100. Their line of battle is drawn up in a wedge-like formation. To give ground, provided you return to the attack, is considered prudence rather than cowardice. The bodies of their slain they carry off, even in indecisive engagements. To abandon your shield is the basest of crimes, nor may a man thus disgraced be present at the sacred rites or enter their council. Many indeed, after escaping from battle, have ended their infamy with the halter. And so many men who have embarrassed themselves escaping from battle, you're supposed to die with your liege lord, go hang themselves. The halter means hang themselves. They also carry with them into battle certain figures and images taken from their sacred groves. And what stimulates their courage is that their squadrons of battalions, instead of being formed by chance or by a fortuitous gathering, are composed of families and clans. Close by them, too, are those dearest to them, so that they hear the shrieks of women, the cries of infants. Their wounds are to every man the most sacred witnesses of his bravery. They are his most generous applauders. So it's cool to have wounds. Now it's cool to have tattoos. It was cool to have scars and wounds, because that proves you've been to battle. The soldier brings his wounds to mother and wife, who shrink not from counting or even demanding them, and who administer both food and encouragement to the combatants. So once he's sliced up a little bit, he has to go show his mother and wife so that they can see, oh, wow, you're really fighting well today, my dear. Tradition says that armies already wavering and giving way have been rallied by women who, with earnest entreaties and bosoms laid bare, have vividly represented the horrors of captivity, which the Germans fear with such extreme dread on behalf of their women, that the strongest tie by which a state can be bound is the being required to give, among the number of hostages, maidens of noble birth. So here we learn that if they're losing in battle and the women need to really prod them on, of course, we don't do this in football games today, but their mothers or wives actually bear the breasts to say, this is what you're giving up. This is how I nursed you. You know, this is us. We are your family. If you lose, this is what you're giving to your enemies. If you have read Iliad and Odyssey, you'll remember that in the Iliad, Hecuba does this, the queen. All right, so to show them the horrors of captivity, and the strongest tie you can tie yourself to some other people group is to give princesses or maidens of noble birth to marry them off to your neighbor, and that way you'll never have war with one another. Lots of cultures did that. They even believe that the sex has a certain sanctity and prescience. So the female sex has a certain sanctity, a certain holiness and prescience. And they do not despise their counsels or make light of their answers. So they allow women to talk and they listen to their answers. They do not treat them as lessers. And I do believe that this shows some possible early evangelization, because Christianity brings worth to women. Mercury, who in the Greeks called Hermes, he's the messenger god who wears he's got the little wings on his boots and wings on his helmet, and let's see, wings on his shoulder, and he's a messenger. He carries things back and forth. Mercury is the deity whom they chiefly worship, and on certain days they deem it right to sacrifice to him, even with human victims. Heracles and Mars, the Greeks call him Ares, they appease with more lawful offerings. I have not figured out yet the connection between Mercury and human sacrifice. I have not found anything in Greek or Roman mythology that makes that connection yet. The Germans, however, do not consider it consistent with the grandeur of celestial beings to confine the gods within walls or to liken them to the form of any human countenance. They consecrate woods and groves, and they apply the names of deities to the abstraction which they see only in spiritual worship. So these Germanic tribes, we've called them Anglo-Saxons, these Germanic tribes don't make little idols and build pagan altars and pagan temples. They just have a grove of trees. And very usually pagans choose a grove of oak trees because they're strong and can't be blown over. So usually oak trees become sacred to pagan peoples. Augury, that is trying to tell the future, sometimes by cutting open a bird or a deer, cutting open an animal, and then you have the priest or the witch doctor do his ooh thingy. You're looking at the organs of the bird or the animal to then tell the future, like in Julius Caesar in Shakespeare's play. Augury and divination by lot, no people practice more diligently. The use of the lots is simple. A little bough, so a little branch, is lopped off of a fruit-bearing tree and cut into small pieces. These are distinguished by certain marks and thrown carelessly and at random over a white garment. In public questions, the priest of the particular state, in private, the father of the family, invokes the gods and, with his eyes toward heaven, takes up each piece 3 times and finds in them a meaning according to the mark previously impressed on them. So you throw them up 3 times on something white, look at it and say, this says, ooh, what does it say? Tacitus continues to say that they practice augury with birds and horses. Kept at the public expense in these same woods and groves are white horses. Pure from the taint of earthly labor, so they're never put to work, these are yoked to a sacred car. That would be like a chariot or little carriage, and accompanied by the priest and the king or chief of the tribe, who note their neighings and snortings and believe that that would read their fortunes. They have also another method of observing auspices, finding out their fortunes, by which they seek to learn the result of an important war. Having taken by whatever means a prisoner from the tribe with whom they are at war, they pit him against the picked man of their own tribe, each combatant using the weapons of their country. The victory of the one or the other is accepted as an indication of the issue. Will we win or not? You take your enemy, somebody you've captured, fight them against one of your warriors. If your warrior wins this 2-person battle, then that means you're going to win the battle. And if the other guy wins, you're thinking, oh no, this is going to be bad. When they go into battle, it's a disgrace for the chief to be surpassed in valor, a disgrace for his followers not to equal the valor of the chief. And it is an infamy and a reproach for life to have survived the chief and returned from the field to defend, to protect him. To ascribe one's own brave deeds to his renown is the height of loyalty. The chief fights for victory. His vassals or thanes fight for their chief. So you go out to battle with your chief, and he is the one who provides your mead, all of your beer, the big hall where you can all sing and get drunk and clatter your armor around and be real he-men. Think of a football locker room after victory. That is your mead hall. Think of something right out of Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings. But you must say, well, I was mighty in battle because my liege lord, or my king, what are they calling him? My chief is so brave. I'm brave because he is brave. You always give them the credit. That's why you did well, because your chief did well. And it's called a comitatus. It's in the syllabus talking about what comitatus is. It is a type of covenant that they make with one another to protect him. He provides food for them. He's the guy who has money. He might give them gold, daughters. For some reason, he's the wealthy guy and the important one, and they all serve him, and then he will provide for them. Feasts and entertainment, which though inelegant, because we're not talking about silverware here, are plentifully furnished. That's their only pay. The means of this bounty come from war and rapine, so they steal it. Nor are they as easily persuaded to plow the earth and to wait for the year's produce as to challenge an enemy and earn the honor of wounds. Nay, they actually think it tame and stupid to acquire by the sweat of toil what they might win by their blood. So they don't mind going off to shore somewhere, steal women, steal clothing, steal whatever household goods you need, any type of anything valuable, gold that you can find, weapons. Why grow food if you can just steal it from someone else? And so that is their code, part of the heroic code. Whenever they are not fighting, they pass much of their time in the chase and still more in idleness, giving themselves up to sleep and to feasting. The bravest and the most warlike do nothing, and surrendering the management of the household, of the home, and of the land to the women, the old men, and all the weakest members of the family. This is very similar to American Indians, to most tribes of American Indians, where the women do all the work. The guys, they go out and do war, and they go off and hunt, and then the women dress the animals, prepare the animals, skin the animals, make everything, pack everything, unpack everything when you move. They do all the work, and the brave warriors get to lounge around. It is well known that the nations of Germany have no cities, and that they do not even tolerate closely contiguous dwellings. They live scattered and apart, just as a spring, a meadow, or a wood has attracted them. Their villages they do not arrange in our fashion, with the buildings connected and joined together, but every person surrounds his dwelling with an open space, either as a precaution against the disasters of fire or because they don't know how to build. I love that. They are wont also to dig out subterranean caves and pile on them great heaps of dung as a shelter from winter and as a receptacle for the year's produce. For by such places they mitigate the rigor of the cold. So they bury things underground, cover it with dung, and that provides a little insulation and keeps it and hides it from their enemies. As should an enemy approach, he lays waste the open country, whilst what is hidden and buried is either not known to exist or else escapes him from the very fact that it has to be searched for. They all wrap themselves in a cloak, which is fastened with a clasp, or if this is not forthcoming, with a thorn, leaving the rest of their persons bare. They pass whole days on the hearth by the fire. The women have the same dress as the men, except that they generally wrap themselves in linen garments, which they embroider with purple, and do not lengthen out the upper part of their clothing into sleeves. The upper and lower arm is thus bare. Their marriage code, however, is strict, and indeed no part of their manners is more praiseworthy. Almost alone among barbarians, they are content with one life, except a very few among them, and these not from sensuality, but because their noble birth procures for them many offers of alliance. So other neighbors want you to marry one of their daughters for alliance. And so they don't get extra wives because they want them, but because it's expedient. The wife does not bring a dower to the husband, but the husband to the wife. Very rare for so numerous a population is adultery, the punishment for which is prompt and in the husband's power. Having cut off the hair of the adulteress and stripped her naked, he expels her from the house in the presence of her kinfolk, and then flogs her through the whole village. The loss of chastity meets with no indulgence. Neither beauty, youth, nor wealth will procure the culprit a husband. No one in Germany laughs at vice. No nation indulges more profusely. Isn't it funny? They steal, rape, cheat, rob, and everything, but for their own women back at home, they require fidelity. No nation indulges more profusely in entertainment and hospitality. To include any human being from their roof is thought impious. So any visitor who comes, you have to give them hospitality. Every German, according to his means, receives his guest with a well-furnished table. When his supplies are exhausted, he who was but now the host becomes the guide and companion to further hospitality. And without invitation, they go to the next house. And so they can go from house to house to get hospitality and to stay. It is somewhat similar in the Iliad and the Odyssey. I don't see the exchanging of gifts as in the Iliad and Odyssey, but it is very similar in a culture where there are no hotels. And to sleep overnight on a journey means to sleep outside. If you do come to a home, the code of hospitality in ancient times usually demands that someone can knock on your door. And if they look about the same social station, their clothes are no dirtier than yours or don't have any more holes than yours do, something like that. A beggar would not go to a wealthy man's house, and a wealthy man would not go to a beggar's house. But you go to somebody's house and they will offer you hospitality. There are no hotels. And that is so that, again, that person might, in further years, offer hospitality to you. A race without either natural or acquired cunning. So they're not deceitful and they don't lie well. They disclose their hidden thoughts in the freedom of the festivity. Thus, the sentiments of all having been discovered and laid bare, their discussion is renowned on the following day, and from each occasion its own peculiar advantage is derived. So they don't have secrets. They drink up a little bit and then they all share everything. There are no secrets out of being polite. They just say what they think. They're very direct. I love reading Tacitus. Isn't this fascinating? One and the same kind of spectacle is always exhibited at every gathering. Naked youths, I didn't look for naked youths for an image here. Naked youths who practice the sport, bound in the dance amid swords and lances that threaten their lives. Experience gives them skill, and skill, again, gives grace. So they dance around with swords, uninjured. In their funerals, there's no pomp. They simply observe the custom of burning the bodies of illustrious men with certain kinds of wood. They do not heap garments or spices on the funeral pile. The arms, the military arms of the dead man, and in some cases his horse, are consigned to the fire. A turf mound forms the tomb. It is thought becoming for women to bewail, for men to remember the dead. A practice rare among the other German tribes and simply characteristic of individual prowess has become general among the Chatti, of letting the hair and beard grow as soon as they have attained manhood, and not till they have slain a foe, laying aside that peculiar aspect which devotes and pledges them to valor. The coward and the unwarlike remain unshorn. So they don't shave or cut their hair until they have slain a foe. A national peculiarity with them is to twist their hair back and fasten it in a knot. This distinguishes the Survi from the other Germans, as it also does their own freeborn from their slaves. So their slaves can't have a man bun. I guess that's what we call it in 2022. The warriors have man buns. There is a common worship of Mother Earth, and their belief that she interposes in human affairs and visits the nations in her car, her chariot, in an island of the ocean. There's a sacred grove, and within it, a consecrated chariot covered over with a garment. Only one priest is permitted to touch it. He can perceive the presence of the goddess in this sacred recess and walks by her side with the utmost reverence as she is drawn along by heifers, by cows. They worship the mother of the gods and wear as a religious symbol the device of a wild boar. And this is where we get to kind of the Beowulf helmet, the part of the Beowulf helmet that goes right down the middle, like that hairdo, you know what it is, a hairdo that sticks straight up down the middle of your head. That's what the boar decoration does. It's kind of facing the back or the front, and it stands up along this part like a mohawk, like a Native American mohawk. So this boar, obviously a wild boar can kill you. They have tusks, they have sharp teeth, they're very, very fast, they're very powerful. They'd be like a pit bull. They'd be like a wild pit bull, and they can kill you. So to use a boar as a decoration, you can see all that implies. It implies that you are wild, tenacious, very dangerous, can kill easily, and you have really cool stiff hair on the top of your head. So this, they wear this as a religious symbol, the device of this wild boar. This serves as armor and as a universal defense, rendering the votary of the goddess safe even amidst enemies. So he wears, he can even wear a pin with this, and that's supposed to give him safety. Closely bordering are the Sones and the tribes of the Cetones, which, resembling them in all else, differ only in being ruled by a woman. And this is my favorite part. So low have they fallen, not merely from freedom, but even from slavery itself. And that's from chapter 45 in Tacitus. So low have they come that they are ruled by a woman. Isn't that great? The Anglo-Saxons are one of the few cultures who actually reverence women, allow women into their secret conferences and sit around the fire and offer advice, and they get listened to. It's quite interesting that it's really one of the rare early cultures that does that, because pretty much every culture except Christianity or the Jews, as Christianity especially though, has everywhere Christianity has gone, women have been released from that type of slavery or being used to do all of the work and traded and killed and sold and things like that. That doesn't happen after Christianity comes to a culture if they embrace Christian culture. Of course, look at Jesus's contacts with women and you see what a difference it makes. And for the Jews, women were protected and taken care of. And it was all done through the law, so that if you married, I always say if you married a blockhead, the Old Testament law would preserve you. So that, for example, if you married and then you had a child, for 30 to 60 days, you would be considered spiritually unclean. And when you're spiritually unclean, people get insulted by that today. But in the Old Testament, if you're spiritually unclean, that means you cannot cook for your family, clean from your family, wash clothes for your family. You can't go to the tabernacle or temple. You can't do anything. Other women have to bring in food and help care for your family and things. And I look at that Old Testament law and it looks beautiful to me. I see God preserving and caring for women. So if their husbands are blockheads, they cannot make their wife work for 30 to 60 days. They have to take care of them. The rest of their clans, the rest of their tribes will take care of them. And so the Saxons here are a little reminiscence of Old Testament and New Testament Jesus as far as taking care of women. And Tacitus, of course, who would be, is very, very Roman. So women are kind of worthless and not to be trusted and all that. So low have they fallen. They're ruled by a woman. All right, Beowulf and the Re-evangelism of Britain. This is something that I wrote for an online Bible college. Bible college is called Golden State School of Theology. And this is their British Lit 201, I believe, so sophomore college level. That's pretty much what you're doing. But this is an online Bible college. The original people of Northumbria were Celts. In 55 BC, the Roman Julius Caesar had conquered what is now called Britain. After his assassination in 44 BC, Julius was succeeded by the first Roman emperor, Caesar Augustus, who formerly had been called Octavian. His sister was Octavius, but he decides to be Julius Caesar, and Caesar then becomes not just a name, but it becomes a title, so that all of the other emperors after Augustus are also called Caesar. Nero, Caesar, they're all called Caesar as a title. But originally, Julius was the one who really wanted to be emperor. He started wearing purple robes and things like that. And his good friend Brutus, if you took classical lit, you kind of know about Brutus, named after the original Brutus who saved the Romans. And this, of course, takes them from the time of just being Romans to the time of the first Roman Empire with Augustus Caesar. And so Augustus Caesar was the Caesar when Jesus was born in Bethlehem. So after Julius Caesar is assassinated, to prevent his becoming the first emperor, then his nephew becomes the first emperor. So it really just slowed it down a little bit. But that's what's going on in Rome in that first century. 55 BC, that's before Jesus is even born. Imperial Rome enjoyed almost 400 years of its golden age, the golden age of Rome, before succumbing to the Germanic invasions of the Jutes, Geats, Danes, Angles, and Saxons. Now, these do later become other people. We call them, let's see, the Huns, the Vandals, the Visigoths. These are names we still use today, but they're coming from other places, and then they get renamed. Some of them become the Franks, become the Germans, and the Angles become the British. You've got, it's very easy to trace these, even just using Genesis 10 and 11. Excuse me. So Rome had 400 years of its golden age before it fell to the Germanic invasions. And all of these people invaded, and this is a really good map on side 49, the Jutes, the Geats, the Danes, the Angles, and the Saxons. And they end up being called the Anglo-Saxons, the Angles and the Saxons. But think of how warlike they are. Think of how vicious they are. And near the end of the Roman Empire, they're just not ready for that kind of a fight. And they start leaving the lands that they had taken. So they had taken Britain, and they kind of back out of Britain. You can tell just from the map that for Carthage, well, this map doesn't list everything, but you can tell that Britain was very, very hard for them to hold. It's in the upper left-hand corner of this map on slide 49 in the beige. That's Britain. That's really hard to hold an island. And so the Romans, that's way far away from the city of Rome in Italy, that boot-shaped country, the Italy. And so one of the first places they had to back out of was Britain. So they were there for a while, and then they left. And it created kind of a vacuum. These Germanic and Scandinavian tribes brought their stories with them. And that's why Beowulf is filled with references to Danish warriors and Danish kings. How is Beowulf, if it's from Britain, filled with stories about Danish warriors and Danish kings? The Roman legions withdrew from Britain in AD 410 to protect Rome from invaders. So they had been in Britain, that's an island, and they had to go back home because Rome was in trouble. In fact, St. Augustine, if you took classical lit and we read the Confessions of St. Augustine, that Augustine was dying in AD 410 as the Visigoths and the Vandals were surrounding Rome and ready to rip down the walls and take it apart. And so the legions had left Britain. They had to come back home to Rome just to protect Rome from invaders. And the territory was given over to the Anglo-Saxons. So that British area, what we call Britain today, it was just given back to the Anglo-Saxons or given over to them. That's why when we refer to Old English, we're referring to the language spoken by the Anglo-Saxons. So there are English people there, kind of Anglo-English people, and there are Saxons, which are Germans, and you throw them into there together and you mix it up, and that's Old English. The story of Beowulf may be written by a Christian poet who is looking back in time to his pagan ancestors before they conquered England. His ancestors were converted to Christianity by missionaries. All right, so Beowulf, you're looking to his pagan relatives before they conquered England. He doesn't belittle them for their pagan worship. He commends them for their bravery, their loyalty, making it clear that they were ignorant. They had never heard the gospel of grace. They didn't know about Jesus, so they're not responsible for Jesus. The Beowulf poet is proud of his ancestors and highlights their great deeds while inserting gospel truths into the story. In AD 597, St. Augustine, not Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo, who was dying in Rome in AD 410, he was such a saint, the author of the Confessions, that lots of people were named Augustine after him. So this other St. Augustine, AD 597, important date, you could even circle it in your syllabus, set out to bring Christianity back to England. So the original apostles, some of them had gotten as far as the place that we now call Britain. They had gotten there. But then when the Romans left and gave it over to the Anglo-Saxons, it went pagan again. So St. Augustine is sending these 40 Irish monks into this pagan place, what we now call Britain, and they're going to try to re-evangelize them. They've heard about Jesus, they've mixed him up with their pagan stuff, and now he is coming back with 40 monks to try and Christianize them again. He sends them to Kent. You can look on several of maps in the syllabus and see the area of Kent in their efforts to make Christianity palatable, so tasteful to this heroic pagan culture, these people who value honor, pride, and to assure the people that their own culture will not be lost. They may have prepared the story of Beowulf to serve as a sort of missionary tract. So it is possible that the story of Beowulf was taking some truth and about wars and battles and creating a hero who is Christian but acts according to the heroic code, so that they would have someone they would look up to and not think that he is weak, and yet learn the ideas of kindness, goodness. Beowulf is an old story of their own people from North Germany and Denmark, with some Christian elements thrown in. Literary critics argue about the warriors singing hymns to Christ in the mead hall. That's in Beowulf. You'll be reading that this week. The warriors singing hymns to Christ in Beowulf. Warriors singing hymns to Christ. It kind of doesn't make sense, does it? And they consider it a later addition or a tactless intrusion. But it's an essential part of the story, and it links the first English epic, Beowulf, with the Northumbrian, this area in Britain, with the Northumbrian Renaissance, rebirth, and the formation of England itself with Christian missions. So just as America was formed by Christians, the America that we have now, that England would have been put together with Christians. Beattie, the first historian, and he was a Northumbrian. If you're looking at your map of Britain, I think page 51 of the syllabus has a good map of Britain and labels Northumbria, wrote his vision of England united under Christ, and he popularized the use of BC and AD in the bargain. And so Beattie's use of BC and AD survived for 2,000 years. It's only in the last 50 years that universities have required the use of BCE and CE, before Common Era and Common Era, rather than before Christ and after death, or Anno Domini, after the death of Christ. All of time was measured from Christ until just a few years ago, when editors decided this would be one way to remove Christ from every historical date ever written. A look for Christian symbolism in the fight with Grendel, the fight with Grendel's mother, and the slaying of the dragon, and compare the slaying of the dragon with the whole idea of Revelation, where the dragon is slain in the end. This is quite interesting. And I do have a quote here from a online friend only. We never met in person, Dr. Jan Haluska from Southern Adventist University, way back in 1997, when I was writing the study guide, gave me all types of information to think about and books to read, which I then went and got and read, and helped me as I formed this. And so I often quote him, and he now has passed on to be with the Lord. But this is from our personal correspondence. Because Beowulf is written in Old English, we have to read it in translation. Unless you become an English major, and then you'll do some focus on Old English. But Old English is rarely read at the high school level. That's a college level only for a specialist. It's written in Old English, so we have to read it in translation, and we're using the Frederick Rebsamen edition. There are later editions that other people like. I prefer the Rebsamen. In 1939, and this is really cool, I'm watching my time. This is really cool. It's the Sutton Hoo excavation. In 1939, Sutton Hoo, this is a place in England, out in a field somewhere, the discovery of a 7th century, that means the 8600s, the 7th century is the 8600s, and that's the era of Beowulf. They found this ship laden with both pagan and Christian artifacts, and that testifies to the two cultures, pagan and Christian, existing alongside one another. We're going to be examining these two cultures through our study of Beowulf, and that's what my study guide is all about, and that's why we study Sutton Hoo, and that's why I'm wearing my Anglo-Saxon jewelry today. Beowulf is an early 3,183 line heroic epic. Heroic is the worldview. So fame, boasting, pride, honor is a big deal. You boast about it, boast about your fame, and everything is oral. It wasn't written down till much, much later. And who passes on the oral history? It's the bard, the scop, the singer, the guy that goes place to place and sings songs of wars and battles. Because if you have a mead hall, think of a great big hall where the warriors hang out. You're not going to have romantic stories about girls. You have stories of war and brave men. And the idea is to, I suppose, exaggerate a little and to encourage all these young men to be brave in battle so that songs will be written about them and sung. And the scop can also bring news from one place to the other. He travels from place to place, entertaining these people in the mead hall. Think of a hall that looks like something out of Lord of the Rings, because that's where Tolkien got his ideas, is from Beowulf. So it's a heroic epic written by an anonymous, possibly Northumbrian poet. It is the single extant manuscript of its kind. So there's only one. There's only one copy of Beowulf. Beowulf represents Old English, Anglo-Saxon, in the lost heroic age, with emphasis on loyalty, courage, and vengeance, according to the Germanic tradition. I just read an article about the British Museum acquiring manuscripts from the cotton collection, and they moved them somewhere after Robert Cotton, I believe, after he died. They moved his incredible manuscript collection over somewhere else because they were afraid it would burn in his own library. And where they moved it to, that caught on fire and that burned. And so many things were lost, but they had actually started a copy of Beowulf, or right after the fire, they did a copy of Beowulf and were able to make another copy of it. Only the edges were burned. But there's only the one manuscript, which is now in the British Museum. From various archaeological finds, we know paganism existed alongside Christianity during the era in which Beowulf was composed, the 6th and 7th century AD. The Battle of Maldon is an excellent example. There are revealing Christian elements in the Beowulf poem, and certain conventional modes of utterance and traditional forms tell us that the author was a trained poet. So he's a trained poet. Pope Gregory had instructed his missionaries to England, remember those 40 monks, to work through the pagan beliefs rather than wipe them out at a stroke. The Beowulf author reveals advanced capabilities and learning in his fusion of pagan and Christian thought, leading some to believe he came from a monastery. Is the Beowulf poet? Was he a monk coming from a monastery? He does not insult them. The awesome protagonist of this story, Beowulf himself, is not only heroic, he brags, he boasts, he gives all credit to his liege lord, but his liege lord is God. And so it's heroic and it's Christian, and it's a beautiful blend. Some people used to think that monks altered it later and threw in some little Christian things, that it would have been completely pagan, and the character of Beowulf, that it would have been completely pagan and heroic. But now people are realizing that's not the case. And that's why I give you a couple of pages sample of the awesome teacher down at, I think, the U of O, who in 1990 wrote Cliff Notes. And those, you can buy those used anywhere. Those are worth downloading or buying to get the rest of those if you really get into Beowulf. And she does believe that this is original. What we have is the way that they wrote it originally. Now, as to Beowulf, and this is from my friend, Dr. Jan Haluska. Now, as to Beowulf, he told me, picture this. The time is roughly between 650 and 750 in what would become England. Northumbria has just undergone her own Renaissance, during which the Roman and Celtic churches went head to head over which would take over a previously pagan country, and Rome won. Okay, so the Celtic churches, the kind of Irish churches, and the Roman church, and they are different, fight head to head. And who wins? Rome wins. Now, they're sending missionaries to the still pagan kingdom of Mercia to their southwest in the middle of the country. Problem, how do you make Christianity palatable and attractive to these people? Along with that, how do you assure them that their culture won't be blown away by this new religion? They might fear Christianity will ruin their entire culture. Well, you might take an old story from the time when their ancestors were still living in North Germany, Denmark, etc., and slide in some Christian stuff, and then poof, you've got a missionary tract. Isn't that cool? The events happened 200 years before Beowulf was written, in the 8th to 10th century. And this is in those Cliff Notes. I put a little sample of that. It's in the syllabus, page 39. So the battle that he's talking about, the battles he talks about, and the Battle of Beowulf, this is 200 years before Beowulf's time that he's talking about. The poet, or the scop, recited these well-known stories to entertain them. And that's what they want to hear. Now, reading Beowulf, these are new words for you. And in syllabus pages 40 to 43, you'll find these words. And they're also all in the new glossary. So you need to know what kennings are. A kenning, for example, instead of calling it an ocean, we might call it a sea road or a whale road. And instead of calling it a body, we might call a bone house, we might call a body a bone house. And if you give a speech, why call it a speech when you can call it a word, two words used together as one, a kenning. Now, a litote, this is that negative understatement. The guys who ran away from battle in the poem of the Battle of Malden, he liked not the battle. He was a coward. He liked not the battle. It's really an understatement to make a point. And epithets, we'll read about in the Battle of Malden, Wulfmir the Younger. So maybe his father and grandfather have the same name. So he's Wulfmir the Younger. And sometimes people, Eric the Red, that would be an epithet. Sometimes girls might be Anna the Golden, or Charity the Benevolent, and those would be epithets. Look for weird, and that translates into fate now. Now, the pagans believe in fate. Pretty much all pagan cultures believed in fate. The gods were kind of against you, and if you were fated to die, you're going to die no matter what. And they called that weird. And that changes when they become Christians, and it changes to a thought of providence. And sometimes in Beowulf, we have a little bit of a mixture of fate and providence. Providence means that God's hand guides you one way or another. It is providence. God knows exactly what's going to happen before it happens, and he causes all things to work together toward that way. It's not just fate or some pagan goddess. And so weird becomes providence. Now, a thane is a warrior. The weregild, that's the price of a man to stop a feud. So if you are a warrior and you're practicing your warrior skills, and let's say that I don't know if they had any women warriors, but let's say the young warrior Anna is fighting the young warrior Charity, and they're practicing throwing their spears and things like that. And Charity accidentally kills Anna. And Anna is the only child, or the oldest child, or heaven help us if she was Alfred instead and was a boy, maybe their only boy or their oldest boy. Her life is worth a lot. She's the one that her parents were looking to take care of them as they got old. She might be the one who does all the work in the field, does all the work. She's a very valuable person. And so the weregild, the price of a man to stop a feud, even if they're friends, Anna's family will have to go in retribution and kill somebody in Charity's family. And then somebody in Charity's family will have to go kill somebody from Anna's family, and back and forth and back and forth. And we call it a feud. And we had some of this in the Appalachian Mountains in early American history. But the weregild, for an honor culture where everything's based on pride, what have you done to a person's pride if you kill their oldest son or their oldest daughter? of the one they were planning on marrying a prince or marrying someone who could help them come to their farm. So a woman or a man is worth a price. And if they got kicked by a horse when they were young, maybe they're not worth very much. Maybe they're never going to amount to much, and their price, the wergild for them, would be a lower price. But if they're quite valuable, the wergild is going to be high, and that price has to be paid, or you're going to have a blood feud. So the wergild, who is going to collect the wergild? If you kill someone, that has to be paid, or you're going to have a constant feud, whether they're friends or foe to begin with. We have that in American society today when we sue someone for a wrongful death, and we sue for the worth of that person. It's the same thing as a wergild. If they're a very important person, then we sue them for more money, the loss of their companionship, the loss of their income. And so then we sue for a higher price. Whereas if they were homeless and couldn't work, or had been kicked in the head with a horse and when they were younger, something like that, then the price would be much less. And that's the same type of idea. Look for caesura, a pause. We kind of miss that in the English. In the Old English, it would be 4 beats, so that the poet could have that beat in the music to help him to memorize his lines of the Beowulf poem. And so you have 2 beats, a pause, 2 beats, but we kind of miss that in the English. And then alliteration. You know what alliteration is. The Malden poem uses it. The translator has tried to add some alliteration in the Malden poem, but it doesn't work really well. But you know that. Foes fly forever from France. That would be alliteration. You know what alliteration is. So read your syllabus, page 59. It has a list of Beowulf words. These are some important words, but those words are also now in your glossary, and the glossary has the more extensive explanation. Formula composition. This assists memory. If you take classical lit or took it, Iliad and Odyssey, they used formula composition, where he fell he fell thunderously would be an example of every time somebody died in the Iliad. He fell thunderously and his armor clattered around them. I don't know how many dozens of times they say that in the Iliad. And they use that same type of formula composition, where when something happens, they just say it in the same way. And the poet can choose the formula to get him the number of beats or the number of syllables that he needs to fill out his line. And it helps with the memory, just like when we sing songs. Songs are written to beats, and they have a number of syllables, and things rhyme, and that helps you to remember the song. And that's what makes it a song. So formula composition, use the same phrases and lines to describe death, to describe dying, or bravery. There's a unique verse form. There isn't any rhyme here. There is that caesura. They may have even used drums. Alliteration, you know about that now. The 4-beat rhythm, mostly lost in translation when we read it in modern English. The kennings, for example, Beowulf, lines 258. Our Beowulf is divided by line numbers, and they give you a line number every 10 lines. They give you a new line. So if you go to Beowulf line 258, which is on page, I just want to find it so you have it. In my edition, this sample is on page 10, but editions vary. And so your book may not have the same page, but it's almost at the top. The ablest among them, and then you see the break. They've left a pause. That's a pause for the drum or the beat. The ablest among them answered him clearly, lifted up his spear, unlocked his word hoard. And that means he's getting ready to give a speech. He unlocked his word hoard. And the next is all quoted material, and that means it's a big speech. If you listen to the Beowulf read aloud, then I will tell you what he's going to give a speech now. He's unlocking his word hoard. And so I think it is of your to your advantage to listen to the Thelma read aloud. And so that's the way that it's written. And this is the best we can do in English. We even read on the next page, page 11, in your Rebsamen, let's see, there we go, Rebsamen translation. I have a terrible time trying to show you the front of the book. Oh, that's because I'm holding it backwards. Okay, there's the front of the book, and you see the boar's helmet, that boar thing that goes like a mohawk down the middle of his head. My page 10 had the quote here from slide 68, and then page 11 in my Beowulf copy talks about around their mask helmets, golden boar heads beamed to the sun, flashed a war gleam on fire hardened steel. And so here we have, just like syllabus page 43, these helmets with boars, and they've been found at numerous digs in England. And they have chainmail face and neck guards. These are found at Sutton Hoo. They were found at Woolstrom, and they were found at York. It's really incredible how these helmets that they found. But this is very similar to Hebrew parallelism, where you say it one way and then you say it in the same thing using different words. The ablest among them answered him clearly, and they say the same thing in different words. Lifted up his spear, unlocked his word hoard. Litotes. A litote is a figure of speech consisting of an understatement in which an affirmative is expressed by negating its opposite. Like when we were reading about the Battle of Malden, and we read, they loved not the battle. That's an understatement. They didn't like the battle. They were cowards. But instead of saying they were cowards, we say they loved not the battle. Godric and Godrig, I'm probably slandering those pronunciations, the cowards who betray them. And Beowulf in line 12 says, that was a good king. And he was the most awesome king ever. And so they, as an understatement, they say, that was a good king. And an epithet, that's a term to characterize a person or thing, like Wulfmere the Younger from the Battle of Malden poem. So reading Beowulf, what are you looking for? You're looking for things in the heroic code and things in the Christian code. So the list on the left, in the heroic code, what do we see? We see vaunting. So you brag. You brag before you kill somebody, you vaunt. You tell them your name so that they know how important you are before they kill you, etc. So you vaunt. And then the honor code, that your honor, for your honor to be besmirched, is the most awful thing that could ever happen to you. For example, to run away from battle, you may as well go hang yourself because no one's going to even invite you home anymore. Pride, the idea of extreme pride, boasting, and revenge. In Christianity, we have forgiveness. I could add to this other list on the right, forgiveness, because the heroic code is revenge. It's based on revenge. And we still have cultures where the heroic code is practiced. We see that in gangs, gang society, and the Mexican cartels are a heroic code culture. And Japanese society would be a heroic code culture. And then, of course, Muslim code is a culture that is heroic code. And that would be based on the Quran. Honor, pride, honor is everything. To be dishonored, especially publicly, would be the worst thing ever. And then, of course, the way that you treat women. Now, the heroic code, this is very unique to the Saxons, that they treat women quite well, whereas most honor societies, heroic code societies, treat women quite poorly, if not buy, sell, trade. So the Saxons are very unique this way. And I do tend to believe that that's early influence from the first time that Christian missionaries went in, before the Romans got there, before the Romans left. And that the reality of the world is today, because when you're dead, you're gone. And of course, the Christian code would be forgiveness, strength of resolve, humility, justice, do unto others what you want them to do unto you, courage to do what's right, even if everybody laughs at you, and mercy, practicing mercy and forgiveness. And then the reality, our reality is the afterlife. We are pilgrims on a journey. This is not the real thing for us. The afterlife is the real thing. So this week, you're going to read half of Beowulf. I advise you to use the Thelma Read Aloud. Complete half of the Beowulf study guide. The guide's on the webpage. Download it, type in your answers. Don't change the numbering on the study guide. Whatever you do, don't change the numbers. I take away 5% if the numbers change. So if you have a paper copy and then you have a printed copy, compare those numbers. And if they don't match, you scratch them out and make them match. Write it by hand, write the numbers by hand on the copy you turn in, because it's absolutely awful for the person grading your study guide. If the numbers are wrong, then they don't even know how many points each question is worth, because the numbers are on the wrong questions. So don't click in where the numbers are and then push, enter, so that it bumps down, because it'll renumber the entire study guide. So download it, type them in, set your answers apart, use another color of ink, or bump the question down a line, but not from the question. Turn the complete study guide in session 4, 2 weeks from today. So here's a Beowulf answer sample. This is our last slide. The wrong way to answer a question. If number one was, who is Beowulf? And then I answer, Beowulf is the hero or central character in the story, Beowulf. He's a hero in the story, Beowulf. What's wrong there? I've started typing my answer in right after the question. And then your teacher really can't tell what is part of the question, what's part of the answer, and your teacher is not ready to memorize the study guide. Correct form of the answer here on the right. Who is Beowulf, if that was question number one? And then the person doing the study guide has added a space. They've added a space after Beowulf. And if it turns it into number two, then unnumber it quick so that your numbers are the same. Always watch the numbering. The little demons are there. The number demons are there to mess up your study guide and make you lose 5%, which is half a letter grade. And here's my answer. Beowulf is the hero or central character in the story Beowulf. Leave the space, waste the paper. It makes reading your paper easier. If you have color ink, that is the same price as the black ink and nobody at your house cares, print your answers in a dark blue or something. Set them completely apart to make it easier for your teacher. Okay, I know you're going to have fun with Beowulf. It is a great read. It's a great read. As long as you do your syllabus reading, listen to the Thelma read aloud. Go ahead, send me an email. Let me know what you think about it if you want. And I hope this blesses you as it blessed me as I prepared this and then have taught that. I'm going to figure out how to turn this audio off. The Lord bless you.